Jones. Jones.
What's up, tribe? Welcome to another episode of Spiritual Grit. We have a special guest with us today. Melanie C. Jones is a womanist, ethicist, millennial preacher, and intellectual activist. Melanie joined the Union Presbyterian Seminary faculty as instructor of ethics, theology, and culture. And she is the inaugural director of the Katie Genevan Cannon Center for Womanist Leadership since 2019. Melanie's research engages womanist theological ethics and sacred texts, millennials and faith, Black aesthetics and popular culture. Melanie is a co-creator of Millennial Womanism Digital Forum and co-founder of the Millennial Womanism Project, an enterprise committed to enhancing the well-being of Black millennial women of faith and justice and fostering transgenerational womanist dialogue. A third-generation ordained Baptist, come on here, Baptist preacher, sought-after lecturer, and global leader serving professional societies and international boards. Melanie is an emerging millennial voice with noted academic and popular publications, as well as features on television, radio, and news outlets. I would just like to add that she is what the epitome of what we would call Black millennial magic. Let's give it up for Reverend Melanie Jones. It's good to have you.
It is so good to be here. I just want to first say thank you, Nila, for this invitation to be connected with Tribe Purple, as well as to be on this series, Spiritual Grit. It is always a joy to see Black millennial women shining and thriving. So I am so honored and pleasured to be here.
Thank you so much. Rev, we're just going to jump right into this. My first question I have for you is, for those who may not know what womanism is, I mean, we've heard feminism, a lot of times it has negative connotations attached to it, but how would you describe womanism, and what roles do womanists play in the fight against COVID-19 and COVID-16-19?
So I think that's a two-part question. I would start with saying that womanism is a social movement that takes seriously the experiences of Black women at its radically subjective center, and is concerned with the liberation and survival of an entire Black people across the diaspora, and then also is concerned with the well-being of all humanity by extension. I see womanism in its formation to start with Alice Walker's definition of womanist that draws from Black Southern colloquial expressions, you acting womanish, of a mother to her girl child. And Alice Walker somewhat put definition to that in her 1983 edition of In Search of Our Mother's Gardens, Womanist Prose. That outline these kind of four levels or layers that we might place within the kind of womanist definition. I think Walker's definition is a starting point and a point of departure, and it is where womanisms kind of come out in that sense. I speak of womanism as a social movement because it crosses disciplines, from English to architecture to urban studies to social work, right? We see womanist discourse happening, and most notably in my field of study, in religious studies, is where I think that womanist thought has had its most prominence, beginning with our kind of leading trailblazers, such as Reverend Dr. Katie Geneva Cannon, Reverend Dr. Jacqueline Grant, Reverend Dr. Dolores Williams, and so forth. In terms of COVID-19 and COVID-16-19, and what we're facing in this moment, right? Womanists are asking questions about how does the experience, the crisis moment that we're having now, shed a Black light that exposes and reveals the ways in which injustice has been prominent in our world. Womanist discourse says this is not new, that our foremothers and ancestors have been dealing with systematic oppressions, multidimensional oppressions, right, and have been resisting these since 1619. Thus, in a COVID-19 era, we might be in unprecedented times based upon the novel coronavirus that we're experiencing, but certainly this is not a new narrative in terms of Black people, Black folk, Black communities being disproportionately disadvantaged, being marginalized, whether it's food despair, whether it is healthcare, whether it is educational systems, right? We've been in this struggle for freedom for a long time.
Yes, indeed. Thank you. Question number 2, on the Millennial Womanism Project Facebook page, just a plug, if y'all have not visited that page, please go and check it out. It's always filled with inspirational messages, and Melanie is always uplifting people who, just other millennial women who are doing great work, so please check that out. It says, you envision a world where Black women and girls are whole and free. Do you think it's possible for the millennial womanists to simultaneously engage on the battlefields of social justice while living a whole and liberated life? And here's a 2-part question again. If so, what are some examples of how that would look like? Tell us, Rev.
Absolutely. So I think, let me start with what millennial womanism is. For folks who have never heard of that term, I think the strength and the growth of a discourse is that there are multiplicities, meaning there's not just one feminism, there are feminisms. And in that sense, there's not just one womanism, there are womanisms, different places of when and where we enter this conversation. Millennial womanism focuses in on the particularities of millennial experiences. Yes, womanist is already an intergenerational discourse. When Alice Walker says, Mama, I'm walking to Canada, and it's the response, it wouldn't be the first time, that's an exchange from elder to younger. But millennial womanism says there are some particularities that millennials experience as being the most educated generation, but the least compensated generation, right? As being slower to form families, as being interested in greater racial diversity, as in kind of leaving religious traditions and churches in the way that we've articulated or seen institutions manifest before. Those particularities are important for us to engage within a womanist discourse. When millennial womanism came into being, it was not a sense that, oh, we need to create something new. It was a representation that, hey, it's a bunch of millennials who are calling themselves womanists. How are they using the particularity of their experiences in order to engage their own identity? So when I say millennial womanism is for enlivens or seeks to bring about a world that is whole and free, absolutely, it's a sense that when we look at the story of Breonna Taylor, right, a Black millennial woman, 26 years old, killed in her home, that even in the privacy of her own home, she is not safe, right? This is the kind of way in which America's has been domestically violent against Black bodies and particularly Black women. But also to say, right, in our kind of particular moment that millennial womanists are already leading social movements. Let me say millennial women, Black millennial women are already leading social movements. Anyone who says hashtag Black Lives Matter, you're calling the names of, you know, Patrice Cullors, Opal Tometi, Alicia Garza, right, who are already using technical digital platforms in order to extend social movements from being on the line, which means on the front lines of justice, and also online, right? Using their digital technologies that we have invented, right, in order to make our messages clear. And so I think absolutely, can millennial womanists seek justice at the same time of live into their own liberation? That is the goal, right? That justice, when we say pay Black women, right, is also that we want equity, we want fairness, we want the same experiences that our counterparts across generations and across races are experiencing. But it's also the sense that this justice that we're fighting for is that we cannot live into our whole selves and whole truths of who we are if these justices are not rendered. So the fight, this is back to kind of Emily Townsend's notion in A Blaze of Glory, that spirituality is social witness, right? That our quest for wholeness requires that we be justice seeking, truth telling, and wisdom bearing.
Yes, Ashe. You just reminded me of a lot of times the dichotomy we create in our communities, especially a lot of faith communities, where there's the spiritual and then there's the earthly, where there's the body and the flesh and then there's the soul. And we often heavily focus on the justice for the soul, on for the soul, but yet we don't connect the social justice piece. So I thank you for doing that so eloquently. You also,
No, I was just thinking, you know, my birthday twin, I call him that, Dr. Cornell West, often says justice is what love looks like in public, right? And this sense that our quest for justice seeking is always intimate, it's always personal, and it's political at the same time, right? And my goal is that it's personal, political, and hopefully prophetic, that it calls back to institutions and really moves us towards social change.
Ashe. You've also, just listening to you, it reminds me of how women, especially Black women in the Black experience, have always in some way been the source of moral agency. We draw from their literature, we draw from their art, their preaching, I mean, for moral guidance and moral agency. And that brings me to my next question. What is on your reading list and your music playlist right now? And how are these sources of moral guidance and resilience for you?
So, Katie Geneva Cannon said that literature is Black women's repository, right, of our kind of moral wit in many ways, not only our experiences, but our moral wit. And in that sense, I always teach a course called Womanist Literature that highlights, that takes seriously, that reclaims Black women's literature as sources, primary sources for theological reflection as well as biblical interpretation. On my reading list, I am reading Stacey Abrams' The Time Is Now. I think she has important conversation in terms of what should we be doing in a moment on a political front, and her kind of pushing, much like the Coretta Scott Kings of our day and others, pushing the conversation on citizenship, the right to vote, right, and even census and fair count. I'm also reading Meant for Good, which is Principles of Womanist Leadership, I believe, by Deborah Jackson, that lays out various kind of Black women's experiences and their kind of leadership models that they provide for us. And I am a huge leadership kind of person who's always reading texts like Tribal Leadership, Good to Great, all these leadership kind of books to find out how are folks thinking about leadership as I'm leading the Center for Womanist Leadership, and how does that look different from Black women's leadership, or how are we saying in more important things in our own context. On my playlist, I am a huge fan of anything Lauryn Hill, and I'm bringing her back at this time as a part of my playlist. Of course, I always got a few gospel things, and of course, this moment has brought me back to the Clark sisters, and remembering their moments throughout the years. I'm listening to Brian Courtney Wilson because he soothes just my vibe in terms of my work vibe. And I'm even going back to, this isn't different from playlists, but I've been reading and trying to hear some of the voice of Octavia Butler in this season. I think if we're talking about prophecy for for the contemporary moment, Octavia Butler already wrote Parable of the Sword, right? Parable of the Talents, right? She's written countless works that are fitting for this moment and really help us to understand where we are in this time. So I've been reading her work as well as listening to a few of her YouTube clips online to just hear her voice and understand what she would have been saying and thinking in this moment.
Those are great sources. Thank you. And I'm halfway through Parable of the Sower, and it's just disturbing how a lot of it is so connected. It parallels exactly what's going on. In fact, wasn't the president in the book named something like Donald or Don or something like that? That is,
it's eerie how much parallel there is. But what I like about is Lauren Omina, who is the main character, central character, antagonist of that, protagonist of that text. She really is on this quest to determine how to find her own, break away from religious institutions that have not been serving her, how to find her own sense of spiritual grit, if you will, in order to carry her to leading a community. And her wellness, right, participates in the wellness of a whole community that wants to follow her, even as she comes into her own kind of newfound theological sense of being.
Yes. And I mean, this was not rehearsed, but I just want to stay on this book just for another minute. Could you talk to her empathy? I know she has this overwhelming ability to empathize with others, so much so that it almost hurts her, right?
Mm-hmm.
Can we somehow parallel that to womanists and just the women in the Black experience?
Oh, absolutely. I think that part of Alice Walker's definition, I'm coming back to more and more, that a womanist is not a separatist, except for health's sake, right? And this sense of staying at home, this reason to retreat and to wear masks is to literally protect my life, right? And that's okay, right? Even as we lead communities, right? So I think that Lauren's a kind of over empathizing brings me back to Shanika Walker Barnes' work, Too Heavy a Yoke, and Black Women and the Burden of Strength, and how this myth of the strong Black woman and this need to be superwoman, be all things for everybody, has often weighed down on us. My own dissertation work is on the bent over woman, right, who is bended, what I believe, by social political realities, as well as a community that does not participate in bringing forth her healing. And Black women are always up against these crooked gospels, is what I proclaim. We're always up against, right, the realities that said we should not be whole, we should not be free, we should not be well. Part of our work is to push against that and to survive and thrive regardless, right? I think Tracy West says in her work that a Black woman surviving, right? That is already something that we should value, right? That survival is already, right, living into wellness, right? That is something that is valuable for Black women.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And the last question, on your website, Rev Melanie, everybody check out the website, revmelanie.com. You described yourself as a thinking woman of faith, embodying radical love and revolutionary justice in the church, classroom, and global community. If you could go into more detail, what does radical love and revolutionary justice look like for you in 2020?
I think that it points back to this, what Stacey Floyd Thomas, Dr. Stacey Floyd Thomas names as redemptive self-love, this ability to love yourself regardless, right? And that's coupled always, with our quest for justice seeking, I think I said this before, I'm always concerned about ways in which we could be truth-telling, how we can speak to institutions and call for social change, even if it means leaving those institutions. But that critical kind of engagement comes from a deep love of those institutions. It is not critique for critique's sake, right? It is critique because I really do love the Black church and understand its meaning and its power. Is why I want to push back on an institution that continues to marginalize Black women, queer folk, right? The poor, right? That continues to do kinds of these injustices. It is because of that love that I'm driven to change. So that radical love and revolutionary justice says, my work comes out of a place of deep love, right, for Black culture and wanting to see the best of it, deep love for Black women and wanting us to be able to thrive and flourish, a deep love, right, even for education in terms of my academic work that I believe, as Bell Hooks says, that education is the practice of transformation. It is the model for freedom, right? But there are also ways in which we need to rethink how education is done in terms of access and limiting access and disparities across educational systems that ensure that the have and the have-nots remain, and some people have information and others don't. So this kind of radical love and revolutionary justice is a point that, yes, social change is necessary. This is not something that I'm willing to do outside of the community. I want to be square within it, right? And to have conversations for our intercommunal as well as intracommunal wellness.
Yes. Reverend Melanie, everybody. Rev, thank you so much for joining us today. I just want to ask, where can we find you? And also, where can we donate to all of the causes that you're with?
So personally, you can find me at revmelanie.com or on Facebook and Twitter at revmelaniej. But as I said, I'm the director of the Katie Geneva Cannon Center for Womanist Leadership, where our mission is to nurture the soul of Black women as they cultivate pathways to whole communities. And we envision ourselves becoming the global center for womanist theory and practice in the nation. So you can find us at centerforwomanistleadership.org. That's where you can make a donation to join with our cause, see some of the initiatives that we're addressing. We double the W in many ways. We are concerned with womanist wellness, womanist wisdom, womanist witness, womanist wares, womanist worship, and womanist works. And so you can join in one of our initiatives and prepare to see our virtual conference that is coming in 2021. And also on Facebook, you can find us at Center for Womanist Leadership, and on Twitter, you can find us at Just Womanist.
Rev, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you all for joining us today. I'm excited about next week. Also, we have joining us Dr. Beverly Mitchell. She is a professor at Wesley Theological Seminary, a professor of church history. She's taught class on womanism. She teaches classes on the Black experience, Black history, as well as she has a lot of works that parallel Black experience with actually the Holocaust, the Jewish Holocaust. So don't miss it. It's going to be awesome. But until next week, keep pressing and keep being gritty, y'all. Peace.
I am a beautiful woman. I gazed on the forest and burned out the Sahara Desert. With a packet of goat's meat and a change of clothes, I crossed it in 2 hours. I am a gazelle. So swift, you can't catch me. For a birthday present when he was 3, I gave my son, Hannibal, an elephant. He gave me Rome for Mother's Day. My strength flows ever on. My son Noah built New Ark, and I stood proudly at the helm as we sailed on a soft summer day. I turned myself into myself and was Jesus, men intone my loving name. All praises, I am the one who would save. I sowed diamonds in my backyard. My bowels deliver uranium. The filings from my fingernails are semi-precious jewels. On a trip north, I caught a cold and blew my nose, giving oil to the Arab world. I am so hip, even my errors are correct. I sailed west to reach east and had to round off the earth as I went. The hair from my head thinned and gold was laid across 3 continents. I am so perfect, so divine, so ethereal, so surreal. I cannot be comprehended except by my permission. I mean, I can fly like a bird in the sky.